Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, a country in crisis. The World Food Programme warns that South Sudan faces an explosive situation after it's forced to scale back crucial food aid in the midst of the country's hungriest ever year. Also, survivors of one of the most brutal extremist attacks in Burkina Faso say that government forces left them helpless as armed men mounted a massacre on their village. At least 79 people were killed in Saturday's violence. And their calls for an extension of the UN's peacekeeping mission in Mali after this week's Security Council briefing on the volatile country. The UN Special Representative in the country says that the challenges are not insurmountable. But first, a desperate lack of funding has forced the World Food Programme to suspend some food aid in South Sudan, just as the country needs it most. Almost a third of the 6.2 million people the WFP had planned on supporting will be hit. More than 60% of people are already facing severe hunger because of conflict and climate change. But the rise in food prices has exacerbated funding shortfalls. The agency says it tried everything before deciding to scale back. It'll now focus on the 4.5 million people in greatest need. I'm joined now by the WFP's acting country director, who joins me now from Juba. Adeyinka Badejo, thanks for speaking to us. Now, you said that South Sudan is facing its hungriest year since independence. What's this going to mean for those who can't count on help anymore?
Thank you, Georgia. And I just want to emphasize that, this really was a decision that was not taken lightly. It was really a decision of the last resort because we had simply run out of any other possible means. What it means now for the families that have been cut off from food assistance is that they are in a precarious situation and they will struggle to make ends meet. They will struggle to put food on the table. What it means is that children will not have access to food. The 1.7 million figure that you quoted includes women and children that were benefiting from our nutrition program. We've seen levels of acute malnutrition rise by about 36%. So what this means is that we will see an increase in the number of malnourished women and children. I was recently in the field some weeks back and meeting with communities where we are cutting off assistance, trying to explain to them the reason why we are cutting assistance. And the mothers were quite alarmed. And what they said to me was that they will be forced to take their children out of school, to work in cattle camps, in trying to help the family survive. So we are very worried about the situation. And this is why we are raising the alarm now. We have been raising the alarm for months. It's not an unforeseen situation. Similar to this time last year, we had to cut food rations for quite a number of refugees as well as internally displaced persons, because what we're seeing on a year-on-year basis is a significant rise in the level of humanitarian needs, which is not necessarily matching the level of funding that we're receiving.
And Adeyinka, why is the food crisis quite so bad in South Sudan?
Well, the factor is it's really a combination of three main factors. You mentioned earlier, the country is undergoing continuing subnational conflict, where we are seeing on a regular basis people being displaced. And when people are displaced, their lives and their livelihoods are disrupted. So we have a situation of continuing subnational conflict and violence in South Sudan. At the same time, the country has experienced 3 consecutive years of flooding. Significant patches or significant portions of land of South Sudan remain submerged underwater. And unfortunately, we are expecting a 4th year of flooding based on forecasts that say we will experience above average rainfall. So these are compounding shocks on communities that have been hit by recurrent and concurrent crises where their resilience has been completely shattered. We also have the situation of economic shocks that are exacerbated initially by the COVID-19 pandemic, and now we have the war in Ukraine. And really what we're seeing across the world is this ring of fire of hunger, and South Sudan is not excluded. We are seeing significant rise in fuel prices that is also translating into increased food costs. So
Adeyinka, is there any, what can actually be done? What are you hoping for by sending this call out?
Well, essentially, we really, want the world to widen its gaze and be aware of what is happening in South Sudan, and also to mobilize support, because what we need is urgent funding. We can avert this situation. We see a looming famine and starvation coming in the coming months. As I said earlier, these cuts are coming really at the start of the lean season. And as the lean season deepens, we are going to see the situation even become more acute. So we're calling for more support, more funding. We need urgently $426 million to be able to restore assistance to families that are no longer receiving this essential lifeline.
Thank you very much. Adeyinka Badejo, the World Food Programme's country director in South Sudan. Well, displaced villagers caught up in a brutal extremist raid in Burkina Faso, in which at least 79 people were killed, are still desperate for help and news of missing relatives. Survivors of the massacre in Seytenga say that they were left helpless after soldiers pulled out a day before the attack. Shirley Sitman has more.
Burkina Faso mourns dozens of people killed in the northern village of Seytenga. Meanwhile, survivors arrived by foot at the nearest town, Dori. Men, women, and children who managed to escape one of the worst attacks in years.
They killed everyone. They don't ask if you're a child or an adult. Even if you closed the house, they did everything to open the door and kill the children and all the men.
Events in Seytenga started on Thursday when suspected jihadists killed 11 members of security forces. After that initial attack, survivors say security forces left, leaving residents defenseless.
The next day, when they came to pick up the bodies, security forces packed up and left. The next day, armed men took positions around the village and shot all the people they saw. They stormed homes and killed people.
Burkina Faso has faced a jihadist insurgency for 7 years. Thousands of people have been killed. 2 million others have had to flee their homes. Repeated attacks fueled a military coup whose leaders promised to tackle terrorism. But now, people are disillusioned.
They said they came to fight terrorism. We are still waiting.
Seytenga survivors are also calling to step up efforts. Some want to show their resolve by returning to their destroyed village.
And hours before the first flight taking asylum seekers from the UK to Rwanda, and the European Court of Human Rights granted an injunction against the deportation of an Iraqi migrant due to be amongst the few scheduled to be on the plane on Tuesday night. The ramifications of the decision are still not clear, but could delay takeoff. The policy has been internationally criticised, but British Prime Minister Boris Johnson remains undeterred. He's dismissed accusations that the plan is immoral and says it will help put off people traffickers. Now, the United Nations Security Council met this week for a special briefing on Mali, where more than 12,000 UN troops are stationed as part of the MINUSMA peacekeeping operation. At least 3 UN peacekeepers have been killed this month by improvised explosive devices planted by Islamist insurgents in Mali. The Security Council will vote on June 29th whether to renew MINUSMA's mandate, and the UN's envoy to the countries called for an extension. Our regional correspondent looks at how likely that is.
There are many points that UN officials could legitimately use to argue for an end to the MINUSMA mission. For a start, this is one of the deadliest peacekeeping operations in the world. In fact, since 2013, when MINUSMA began, more than 200 UN peacekeepers have been killed in Mali. Then there's the price tag. The current annual budget for MINUSMA stands at more than $1 trillion. And you need to ask, In exchange for all this money and the loss of human life, what has the UN got in return? Well, for a start, Islamist violence in the country appears to be increasing rather than decreasing, according to the latest UN report. Then there's the fact that the UN MINUSMA force there is obliged to work with the Malian government, or junta, I should say, which took power in a coup in 2021. This junta itself stands accused of grave human rights violations, including the killing of civilians. It's also accused of blocking UN investigators' access to various alleged massacre sites around the country and of working with Russian mercenaries. Despite all of this, a UN representative to Mali told reporters following the UN Security Council meeting that there was support within the UN Security Council for maintaining this MINUSMA mission. Why? Because despite the difficult conditions, there's clearly still a lot of work to do when it comes to establishing some kind of peace in Mali.
Sam Baptiste there for us. That is it, though, for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again if you can. Till then, take care.